Docker's pull plan has been pulled. Open says a hacker. Apple's all in on AI. Cisco and NVIDIA launched some new networking. HP puts holds on hold. And we're going to launch into this whole new quantum realm with our friends at Microsoft in this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown. Today is Wednesday, February the 26th. And once upon a time, two very smart technical people got on a podcast and created some great stories about the news, and they lived happily ever after because it is National Fairy Tale Day. And joining me, of course, is the big bad wolf himself, Mr. Alistair Cook. Al, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. And, you know, as a big bad wolf, or evil owl as the moustache became, I would like to remind you that it is also National Set a Good Example Day. Now, Tom, I think despite your best efforts, you are still being a good example most of the time.
Well, I always like to tell people that I can be used as an example. Good, that's debatable. What is not debatable, though, is the great lineup of news stories that we have coming your way today, because it's been a busy week in tech, and we have some things that we definitely want to talk to you about. The first one, of course, is that container company Docker recently announced a plan to significantly limit image pulling for users, as well as a storage-based billing setup. But late last week, the company walked back those plans due to comments from the community. Paid Docker customers will, going forward, have unlimited pull rights. Authenticated users will have rights to more images than they could have pulled previously, and free unauthenticated users will still be limited to 10 per hour. The plan for the storage-based billing will also be reworked into a set of tools that will help customers manage their storage a little bit better, and of course, reduce the overhead placed on Docker. Al, is the community signaling that there are limits on what they're willing to pay for when it comes to Docker?
Well, I think the community always appreciates getting something for free and is always reluctant to then start paying for the thing that's been given away for free. And that's a challenge for organizations like Docker, who start with an open source model and an open access to everything. The model of saying, we'll host your container images, we'll hold them on our web servers, and we'll pay for all of the storage and all of the bandwidth, really doesn't work as a scalability, right? It's, you know, we're going to lose money on every person who does this, and we're going to make it up by economies of scale. No, you've got to start selling something. And that's really where the challenge has been, that Docker needs to be financially viable. They need to cover the costs of hosting the service that they provide. Now, that service, hosting Docker images, maintaining some really well-curated images of their own, is incredibly valuable. And so they've been working over time trying to find a way of financing that without withdrawing from delivering those services. What they've definitely seen is that taking away services we're used to and we rely on, even when they're free services, is very unpopular. And so you've got to find that fine line where you can actually make some money from providing these services, and the point where you go out of business, right? Because everybody chooses not to use your service because it's too expensive, and therefore you can't afford to cover the cost of running the service that you provide for free. I think one of the things we did see was a move towards more enterprise organizations hosting their own container repositories on premises to reduce their reliance on the Docker Hub as a location for their images. Now, that, of course, means that Docker's not making money from those enterprise customers for hosting their images. And so it does feel like it was a little bit self-defeating. The challenge is many of us hobbyists are used to being able to just do a Docker pull at will from container repositories that are on the Docker Hub, and it's us that are making a lot of noise. I don't think enterprise organizations are concerned about these shifts. There's shifts in pricing. Always they're prepared to pay for value. It's more the hobbyists, open source projects where there's no financial benefit to the person who's using the Docker Hub. So yeah, definitely we're seeing that there's a reluctance to spend money on the service that was provided for free, and that we built the way we operate around those services being available for free. Personally, I've built container registries inside of my environments in order to provide that ability to work entirely offline, also to not be reliant on external images. But the reality is there's a lot of software deployment, software release that relies on free access to Docker Hub. And that restriction to 10 pulls per hour could be particularly problematic where you've got things like Kubernetes in use and you have a distribution that contains a pod, and the pod may well contain 10 or 12 different containers. More often it's one or two, but you may deploy it across 6 or 7 different hosts. Well, 6 or 7 times 2, 14. Well, that's more than 10 an hour. So you'd have some deployment challenges around that. It's time to change the password from your luggage. It should no longer be 1234. And your air shield. Security researcher Eric Daigle discovered that the Interphone mesh door access system had a vulnerable default password that could be exploited to remotely access door locks across the United States and Canada. The company, which was acquired by Hirsch, has said they will not be patching the issue because the practice of default passwords was outdated. Daigle scanned the internet or his local network and found 71 systems that had the store entry system exposed to the internet and still used the default password. And that password, of course, being well known, it's written in the documentation, could easily be exploited. And so Daigle found himself, he had a CVE that was published with his name alongside it. Tom, is your luggage password still the same as the nuclear release codes?
No, no, no. I've changed it. It is no longer CP 1704 TKS. And if you got that reference, it's time for you to schedule your colonoscopy. There's a tale of two things here. One, don't put default passwords on anything. Bad, just bad. No nuclear missiles for you. More importantly, though, this is an example of what happens when companies acquire technology, but they don't want to support it, right? I'm sure that when Hirsch bought this company, they wanted to move into this area, and I'm sure that they made some changes and decided that this was a bad idea. But kids, you bought the company. You also bought their support department, and you bought all of the problems that those devices still have, which means you own it. And I applaud Eric Daigle for finding this 7 months ago and sitting on it and just waiting, right? I'm going to give them a chance to fix this. I'm going to give them a chance to put out a patch. And they didn't. And they said, well, that's an outdated process. Oh, yeah, we have a lot of outdated processes that we don't use anymore, but it still means that if something breaks, you need to go fix it. And I really would hope that this company doesn't about face with all this public recognition and says, fine, we'll patch these systems that are connected to the internet, and that's that. Because, I mean, Shodan.io is still a thing, people. And if you want to go to Shodan and figure out if this is a big deal, feel free. The one thing I will say, though, is if you want to get this fixed really quickly, find out if any of the people at Hirsch have one of these things installed in their apartment building and start popping their door locks. And I promise you that patch will be out by tomorrow. How much could you do with $500 billion? Well, if you're Apple, I think you're hoping that you could do a lot with AI. The company announced this week that they're going to be investing $500 billion over the next 4 years in US-based technologies to enhance AI. Here's what they're planning to do with it. They're going to build a 250,000 square foot server manufacturing facility in Houston, Texas, and that's going to be open by 2026, according to the reports. There's also plans to expand data center presence in 5 other US states. On top of that, Apple is planning on hiring about 20,000 new employees that are going to be focused on things like silicon manufacturing, software development, and everyone's two favorite acronyms, AI and ML. Al, it really does feel like Apple's going all in on AI to a pretty big price tag.
Yeah, $500 billion is a heck of a lot of money to spend on committing basically to AI. But it's not new that Apple is committing to AI. There's been AI chips in iPhones for a long time. One of the best places for running AI models locally is on hopefully an M4 now based MacBook, and I have beside me a little Mac Air that has an M2 CPU in it, and it does a better job of running an LLM locally than my i9 based MacBook that is my big beast. So Apple's definitely committed to AI, to building silicon around AI, and that is one of the interesting things about the investment. It's not just that 250,000 square foot server manufacturing facility. It's the 20,000 employees who are going to be hired and upskilled around building the actual silicon underneath. And this is an interesting thing, right? We've seen huge improvements in the valuation of NVIDIA through innovation in core silicon. And I think this is where Apple is chasing here. Right? It's a much bigger investment than, for example, AWS saying they're going to spend 100 billion on building out more data center capacity for AI. And this is 500 billion being spent. It's a huge investment. And I personally really love that a large chunk of that investment is in people and growing expertise. I think this is one of the things that we recognize is very difficult in the industry, is to find experts. And you've got to invest, you've got to spend a lot of money and a lot of time to build up those skills and experiences, build that experience right through that vertical hardware stack. Now, one of the challenges here is that it takes more than a year to do silicon design. It takes typically somewhere between 3 and 5 years to go through that silicon design cycle. And so, although we'll have a manufacturing facility next year to build more of Apple's equipment, we'll also have a longer tail of innovation for more and more powerful CPUs, and maybe more challenging against incumbents like NVIDIA. I'm also really interested to see that it's a server manufacturing facility in Houston. Apple got out of having servers quite a while ago, the Xserve range, or at least for retailing servers. The Xserve range disappeared and we were told to use Mac Minis as servers instead. I would be really interested to see if this is a 250,000 square foot of server manufacturing just for supplying themselves with hardware and making sure there's no reliance on external suppliers, or whether maybe they're going to get back into delivering server machines to run AI on premises at customers. That will be an interesting change. Coming off the heels of Cisco Live EMEA, which you, of course, Tom, were at, we get a big announcement that Cisco and NVIDIA are partnering up in the networking space. Yesterday's announcement will create a unified architecture that enables NVIDIA's Spectrum-X networking with Cisco devices. NVIDIA will be providing Bluefield 3 SuperNICs to run alongside Cisco Silicon One chips. These new switches will be running Cisco iOS on top of NVIDIA hardware. Cisco is, to date, the only partner working directly with NVIDIA on this technology. Tom, what's the networking nerd's take on this innovation?
I think it's very interesting that NVIDIA finally partnered up with somebody to do this. I wondered if this was going to be the case. In fact, I specifically pulled one of the Cisco product managers aside during Tech Field Day Extra when the cameras weren't rolling, and I said, so your initial design for these switches has a DPU from AMD Pensando on it. And he goes, yeah. I said, could I run other DPUs on these switches with the same software from another company? He kind of looked around and he goes, well, I mean, I guess you could. This is what we're supporting right now. Man, if I'd only waited a week. Here's my take on this. If you go out and you go to the Tech Field Day website and click on the link for Cisco Live EMEA, on day one, you can actually see Cisco UCS running an 8 core or an 8 count H100 server, right? Like something ridiculous, like 12.5 kilowatts of power that this thing is budgeted to pull. But you still have to worry about the networking that runs on the back end of it. And this is a step in that direction, right? We know that Cisco is working with the Ultra Ethernet Consortium to create a standard version of Ethernet fabrics to deliver packets to these servers over what they call Network 2, which would be not the GPU interconnects, but the front side of it. But a lot of companies are going with Spectrum-X and with Bluefield to do this. And when you look at what NVIDIA is building into Spectrum-X that requires Bluefield to do this, now you've run into a problem, right? It's effectively kind of locked in. So how do you get access to that market if you're not NVIDIA? Well, you have to figure out how to play nicely. But the catch is that when you look at the market, most of the networking equipment that runs out there, by and large, runs on Cisco, right? And Cisco iOS, say what you will about it, but it is kind of an industry standard command line at this point. And that is a comfortability level that most people would argue for, right? If I'm going to deploy new switches, I'd rather deploy them on an operating system that I understand, that integrates with all of my other devices, that I can manage the way that I've always managed it. And I think this is kind of a blending of that technology. Of course, the hardware underneath is still Spectrum X. It's still running SuperNex, but it is running Cisco iOS on top of it to manage the whole thing. This gives Cisco a way to sell a network that goes along with those AI servers. It's not piecemealing this out anymore. And while Cisco is currently the only partner that they have, I would expect that will open up later on as more companies kind of put forth their ideas on what they want to do. But of course, if you really want to kind of blend these together, you go to the market leader to do that. And everyone knows that that's Cisco right now. So I expect to see more about this coming out very soon. I expect to see some benchmarks. And quite honestly, this should light a fire under the Ultra Ethernet Consortium to come up with their idea to combat what Spectrum X is purporting to do. And we can only kind of wait and see what the fallout's going to be all across the board. Building a telco network is quite an expensive undertaking because most of the money has to be paid before you get any revenue. That means that keeping costs down is pretty vital. T-Mobile is making a big commitment to using Red Hat OpenShift as an application platform for innovation and rapid application development. Al, I guess the question is, have we seen a large-scale adoption of cloud technologies by telcos before, and what makes this adoption of Red Hat OpenShift different?
Yeah, as I was reading this story, I felt a real parallel to when OpenStack was very popular, and Verizon made a huge commitment to OpenStack and running OpenStack in all of their points of presence as their platform. And I guess this is continuing the same trend of carriers needing an application platform that's going to allow network virtualization and delivery of advanced services out across their network. One of the things that is going on here also is 5G is meaning that latency is a much more significant element of delivering good applications. And so we're seeing the shift from having all of your applications running maybe in a cloud data center towards running in the telco's core data center, now moving towards running the applications in the edge locations, where maybe even inside cell towers themselves, in order to minimize the latency for getting application response. There's some real challenges if you're working at that infrastructure as a service level that we saw with OpenStack, where it's a bunch of virtual machines. And so working a little further up the stack is getting Kubernetes, where you're delivering containers as a service. This allows much easier deployment of applications, and the whole immutable image idea with containers suits much better getting out into all of these edge locations. So absolutely, this is both a continuation of the trend of using cloud technologies within carriers' networks, and it's also a expansion out of where these applications that run on mobile networks live. And it is these applications on mobile networks that are driving the increases in revenue for the carriers. Their attempt to get a higher ARPU, and I'm not talking about the Quickie Mart proprietor, I'm talking about the average revenue per user. This is the measure of how profitable your customers are on your network, and you want to deliver them advanced services, advanced applications that they'll pay more for. And yeah, delivering OpenShift out to these edge locations is a really good way to do that. Might ask, why use OpenShift and why not actually develop your own Kubernetes distribution? Because of course, Kubernetes is very standardized across distributions. And I think there's an element of having Red Hat and IBM behind OpenShift as supportability, the ability to get professional services, potentially get professional support for the Kubernetes platform being outsourced to somebody who specializes in that, allowing the T-Mobile team to spend more of their effort on the applications that are delivering more value to their users. So it's not simply adoption of Kubernetes, but also the OpenShift flavor of Kubernetes that brings much broader support as well. We'll continue to see technologies that we're using in the cloud turning up inside these telco networks. It's only a matter of time before this becomes functions as a service all the way out at your edge locations. In fact, they're probably already there. You're probably tired of waiting on support, on a hold for support by now. In fact, if you're still waiting on support, on hold for support since yesterday, you're very tired of it. last week, HP Inc., that's the consumer-oriented part of what used to be HP, announced plans to implement a mandatory 15 minimum wait time for phone tech support. Huh. Hopefully they've got really good hold music, because waiting for 15 minutes is a really long time if you're listening to the same kind of 8-bit chiptunes. The stated reason from HPE was to encourage customers to use other forms, basically disincentivize them to talk to a human. We know that's been going on for a while. Online knowledge bases and forums are the way that HP Inc. would like you to retrieve or access support. And the plan was met with universal derision by the community. After a few days, HP Inc. walked back their plans to implement the increased timer. And Tom, has that meant that you've spent less time waiting for a support engineer?
Al, your call is very important to us, so please continue to wait in queue until the next available agent is ready. By the way, I will say that the best hold music of all time was actually Novell technical support, because there really wasn't a whole lot of music. It was a traffic report, and they would tell you how long the queue times were for a given call queue. So if you knew you needed to call in for network support, you'd be on hold for about 15 minutes. If you needed group-wise support, you'd get right through. Bravo to a company being honest about things. And hey, let's be fair. HP Inc. was very honest about this, right? We are going to implement a mandatory hold time. And I'm sure what they were thinking was, oh, you're going to be on hold for 15 minutes anyway. But here's the thing, and I will tell a lot of people a little secret about the way that enterprise IT support works. Your support technicians do not have the same hold times that you do. As a CCIE, when I call Cisco TAC, when I open a case through the phone, not only can I open a higher priority case, but I give them my number and I am immediately routed to level 2 support. And the reason is because I don't need to spend 20 minutes explaining to somebody why I'm calling support, only for them to go, I can't help you and you need to be elevated anyway. The reason why I have the phone support cheat code is because I've been trained, because I know to go look in the documentation, because I know to go check the bug reports. And if all of those things fail and I do have to pick up the phone, I should be able to get right through to somebody who can help my problem. Look, I know. I used to work in a call center. They're expensive, right? You have to pay the agents. You have certain metrics you have to hit. You have certain quality that you want to aim for. And a lot of the things that I did back in 2002 to support people are a thing of the past, right? Like, I used to send people to the library with a floppy disk to download UART drivers to reload Windows 95. And if any of that made sense to you, you should probably check your mail for an AARP card. But the fact remains that not everything can be solved on the knowledge base. Not everything out there has an answer in a support forum. And I know that we have usually exhausted all of our choices by the time we get there. So I'm glad that HP Inc. finally did a turnaround and said, maybe we don't need to make people wait on hold for 15 minutes no matter what. Maybe what you should have said was, what are the things that would make people want to call us? And maybe create a phone decision tree at the beginning, right? Like, is this a how-to question? Is this something that can be easily answered from these resources? Great. Are you calling us because something caught on fire and you need a new machine? That's a priority support call, right? Like, the number of times that people would call me and say, like, it blew up. And as soon as we knew that it was like a hardware problem or something, I knew I was going to have to wait for 30 minutes when I called the customer sat team to get it fixed. So now, if you've implemented a 15-minute hold time for them, then we determine that there's a real problem. And then it's another 30 minutes on hold. Do you know what happens when that call gets released back into the queue? Mad customers. So please, if you're watching this, HP Inc., good job for you. For everybody else, do not torture your users with unnecessary hold times. And no, we know that the call is not important to you. No, your menu options have not recently changed. Cut the crap, give us what we need, and we'll be on about our day.
We've talked about quantum computing before, but Microsoft created quantum quake in the tech space last week. They announced a new quantum computer chip that took 17 years to make. The Majorana 1 uses a new topological core technology that reduces the error rate significantly and could create chips with as much as 1 million qubits of processing power per unit. Microsoft's researchers repeatedly created a new state of matter in the accompanying research paper published in Nature to help them create the method for increasing the power of the chip. Tom, we've heard quantum hype before. Is this the real deal?
You're going to need to take a shot of quantum and acid before you start digging into this. I'll tell you how I knew that people were talking about it. There was TikTok videos about what they did. So if you've hit mainstream hype, that's the way. First of all, these chips don't have 1 million qubits today. In fact, I would argue they're probably going to have 1 million qubits in 2 years. And remember that qubits are a measure of raw horsepower when it comes to processing in a quantum computer. They are not effective processing power because there's error correction. And that's important. So if you have not watched my quantum computing conversations video from a few years ago, you should totally go do that. Coming back, quantum computers basically work because you can take a photon and you can measure it and you can know every state of that measurement, right? It's not just 0, it's not just 1, it's all the states in between. The problem is that the error rate is very high on measuring photons because if they get bombarded by particles, they get knocked out of that superposition state, right? Here's what Microsoft did. They took 17 years to build a quantum wire that is 1 photon wide, and those photons are all entangled. So if one of them gets knocked out of superposition, the rest of them are still good, and you can observe that. I'm assuming that it took 17 years with a little pair of tweezers to put them all into one straight line. I'm a little skeptical of several things in this. First of all, the best quantum computers on the planet right now are still the size of a garage and require enough liquid nitrogen to float an aircraft carrier to operate. And that's to provide what I would consider to be a reasonable amount of quantum computing power. I don't know if they really did create a new state of matter. That remains to be seen because people are going to have to peer review this paper that they published in Nature. I will say that assuming that everything pans out and they weren't just sitting on this to make a big splash to change the conversation away from AI or what have you, there are massive implications for what all this means for people. I mean, the biggest one is one that I talked about in my video. This will invalidate public key encryption overnight, right? Like if it can really do that many qubits with error correction, it can instantly factor large primes. And thank God we put the quantum resistant encryption protocols in place. Thanks, NIST. We appreciate that. But more importantly, it goes on to solve bigger problems that don't have black and white answers, right? Like protein folding or signal analysis or stuff like that. But the problem is the same problem that we have with everything, because I'm sure that you've seen we have new treatments for Alzheimer's. There's, good cures for cancer on the horizon. But those are research projects with no practical applications yet. And yes, I know Satya Nadella held up a thing and showed it off, and here's what it looks like. And that is just a chip right now. That is a prop. That is no different than, I don't know, me holding up this jar of almonds as far as you're concerned. There's about the same amount of processing power in both of them as we currently speak. The real issue is going to be how they operationalize this and bring it from theory to practice. Because I promise you, you all remember a time in 2022 when LLMs didn't exist as far as you knew. When OpenAI was just a bunch of weird whiz kids out in Silicon Valley that didn't even have a product right now. We operationalized that very fast, but that was software. This is hardware. This is going to have to be manufactured and tested, and it's going to have to be built into things. And I don't know that we're ready for that yet. I hope we are at some point. I would like to see a fully functioning quantum computer online somewhere before I retire. But I don't know that we're going to get there yet. Al, do you think that I'm off base here? Are you excited about what Microsoft is doing?
So color me cynical, because back in 2018, Microsoft made a similar announcement and then had to retract it.
Oops.
And so the proof here is really back in that research paper published on Nature that talks about what the team actually did rather than the marketing spin that's been applied to it. Now, I haven't really spent enough time in quantum physics in the last 30 years since I did a physics degree at the University of Waikato here in New Zealand. Uh, but as I had read a little bit of it and read a little bit of analysis, there isn't even a single qubit being proven to be here yet. What I'd read of it was there was a suggestion that they had created this new state of matter that was theorized 80 years ago by, I can't remember his first name, but Majorana was the gentleman's family name. And that's why this chip is named after him. It's this new state of matter. The suggestion I had read was that what the team actually found was they'd measured something that corresponds to a Majorana particle, a particle that is its own antiparticle, which is kind of weird because we don't expect things to be their own antiparticle. So there's this possibly we measured the thing that goes on rather than we were able to ask this qubit to make some calculation and we got some data out. And I come back to correlation doesn't mean causality. Until, as you say, this stuff gets replicated by other people, until other people are able to actually replicate the measurement, and then it can be scaled. Now, scaling this is really where the magic is. If Microsoft can successfully use this technology that they've announced to produce qubits and produce particularly high density, high reliability qubits, then, as you say, Tom, the world is their oyster. Lots of things fall away. But I don't know that we're quite there yet. And I even saw some little scuttlebutt rumors that this announcement really shouldn't have come out based on the actual technology that's there. And we may see Microsoft walk this one back again, which would be incredibly embarrassing, particularly for the engineering team who are working so hard to advance things. And the marketing team maybe got ahead of their skis and announced more than was actually there. I really do hope this turns into some successful products that allow us to solve new problems. There are a lot of problems in material science and financial modeling where using quantum computing is going to be an unlocker for solving problems that we just can't practically solve now. But we're still, like you, I still have cynicism about this being close to being practically usable and able to do anything more than crack a 56-bit encryption key that we would have stopped using in the mid-1980s.
Yeah. I really wish that companies would stop hyping new technologies like this with unrealistic outcomes. I mean, even just saying a million qubits, nobody knows what a qubit is, like right now, realistically. And for you to say you have a million of them, might as well be saying that you have, like, I don't know, like $1 million, right? Yeah, or a billion, right? You know, oh, I'll put 1,000 of these together. Um, the proof is in the pudding, the quantum soup, as it were. And I mean, Lord knows we're going to be talking about this for years, whether they retract it or not. But I don't think we're going to be using this in the foreseeable future, because I think that the support structures that will be need to build around it to utilize it to its fullest aren't even conceived of yet. And that's one of the problems we deal with technology all the time, right? Is just because you built a hardware thing doesn't mean that everybody's ready to use it. And the 5 Vision Pro users that watch our show will probably agree to that. So, I mean, you know, we're going to talk about it. So I hope that we have some more fun stuff to talk about. But in the interim, before we get to all of that, we have more field day stuff coming up. Al just came off of a Cloud Field Day event, and I'm next on deck. Coming up very soon, actually, just a couple of weeks. I'm going to be out at Networking Field Day. I know we scheduled it on top of NVIDIA's big thing, but that's down in the South Bay. We're going to be up in San Francisco talking to some great companies. In fact, we just confirmed that Versa Networks is going to be a part of this event. If you want to find out who else is going to be joining them there, make sure you head over to techfieldday.com. March 19th and 20th are the dates that you want to pay attention to. And then coming up in April, Al, you're going to be back on the road doing some exciting stuff.
I will be in the South Bay at the end of April, 23rd and 24th of April. We'll be running AI Infrastructure Field Day 2. You may have previously seen this as AI Data Infrastructure Field Day 1. We think there's the data kind of limited things to being all about storage. And of course, your AI infrastructure is going to have plenty of networking and other elements to it. So that's going to be a pretty massive event. After that, of course, I'll hand the baton back to you, Tom, for a couple of events in May.
Yeah, I have a very busy May lined up right now. The first thing I'm going to do in the first week is I'm going to be talking to a bunch of companies at Mobility Field Day. We are going to be hearing from Juniper, and we're going to be hearing from Fortinet, and we're going to be hearing from Nile and Solona and many, many more. And there's still more to come. So make sure you check out techfieldday.com for the full list. End of the month, I'm going to be going back to Silicon Valley to talk about security. And we have some great companies lined up for that as well. And we've got some fun people that'll be joining us for that event. If you're interested in being a part of that, why don't you leave a comment on this video and say that you would love to be a part of Security Field Day, and we will make sure that we, get your name in the list and potentially make you a part of that event. But for now, we're going to go ahead and sign out. We thank everybody for joining us for the Gestalt IT Rundown. Remember, every Wednesday we publish a new episode around lunchtime, so you can listen to us while you're eating that tuna fish sandwich, or perhaps when you're out on your run. If you want to do that, easiest way to do it, check out our YouTube channel, look for us in podcast format, or just go to gestaltit.com and look up the show notes. Videos will be linked in there as well. And don't forget, we do hang out on other Future Room Group and TechStrong programming, whether it's TechStrong Gang or 5G Factor or any one of a number of things. So you never know when we're going to pop up and be talking to you about cool stuff. Until next week, enjoy the rest of your February, both days of it. We hope that it's not super cold where you're at, unless you're in Al's neck of the woods, in which case we hope it doesn't get super hot. But whatever it is, we hope that you have a great week. We hope that you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you in March for the next episode of the Rundown.